G'day from gorgeous Madrid. And if you're here to find out what the drivers drove to the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona last weekend, you are in luck because I've got all the details for you in 8 seconds time. I spend a good part of Thursday and Friday hanging around the F1 drivers' car park so I can tell you exactly what cars they drove. And I can tell you right now that the Red Bull boys, they were both driving Ford Mustang GTs. This is the top of 4 models in this range. The range starts at about $42,000 and goes up to just shy of $60,000. Both drivers driving yellow cars. And both of them did photo shoots with their cars out in the car park. When they say photo shoots, it's all of about a minute, and Red Bull's team photographer comes out to shoot it. As you might have picked up, there are no Hondas being driven to the track by the Red Bull drivers this year. They've already gone over to Ford, even though Ford will not take over the engine supply until 2026. Max Verstappen is a typical late arriver. I caught up with Max out in the car park when I was the only media around, so essentially I could have a chat with him, which was good because I wanted to find out what fragrance he wears for my upcoming video about the fragrances drivers wear. So now I've got all 20 and very shortly I'll share that with you. And where is the driver's car park? It's right opposite the main swipe gates, and it's a short walk for them along this carpeted area to get into the paddock. Next up, let's look at the Mercedes drivers, and George Russell was driving an EQS 53 black in colour. Now these in Europe are around €180,000. They do 0 to 103.8 seconds, completely electric, and they have mood lights inside that you can change the colour of. The promo info says they'll do 606 miles on a full charge, and it has 3 different screens in the front. His teammate Lewis Hamilton was also driving an EQS 53. His was blue in colour. Very quiet cars, as you can imagine, and quite luxurious, as you'd expect from Mercedes-Benz. And I can tell you that Lewis had photographers and cameramen running every which way throughout the course of the event, because some days he would roll up at the main swipes, and then a couple of days he'd roll up there and think, oh, it's too busy there. Right, I'll go to the other end. And all it takes is a couple of people to move off at speed who've got the whiff of what's going on, and everybody else follows, because nobody wants to miss a shot of Lewis coming in his spectacular outfits. Next up, the Alpine drivers. Esteban Ocon was driving an Austral E. This is a car that retails for around €35,000, or I think his version might be the Alpine one, which is a little bit more, maybe €2,000 more. No difference in performance, it just gets an electronics upgrade. But on one day, I found Esteban coming in with his helmet on his head. And I'm thinking, you didn't ride a bike, surely? And he said, no, the guys just sent a scooter out to pick me up because the traffic at the entry to the track was at a standstill and he had commitments. And Pierre Gasly, also driving a Renault Austral E, he came in with his girlfriend Kika. And where do the drivers drive in from? Well, some of them stay in the city at hotels like the Arts or the W. You might have seen that Carlos posted a couple of stories from his hotel room. It was very clear where he was staying. But those who don't stay in the city and make that 35-minute drive stay in a motorhome, but not at the track. That has gone by the way. They were allowed to hole up at the track, but not anymore. They have to park a little bit away. And I don't know exactly where they were, but it was a short drive. Well, without traffic, it was a short drive. Oh, and do any of them stay in Airbnbs? Yes. I happen to know that both Daniel Ricciardo and Oscar Piastri have rented Airbnbs in Melbourne because they say it was too tricky and time-consuming getting into a hotel room at the end of a day when you had hundreds or maybe even thousands of fans waiting outside the hotel. And how do the people know where drivers stay? Well, it doesn't take much. Word spreads pretty quickly. Let's talk the Williams drivers now, and both Alex Albon and Logan Sargent were driving these C200D Mercedes. And Alex had his girlfriend Lily with him on a couple of days. She's very popular on social media. And his teammate Logan Sargent was also in a 200D, a C-Class. Not terribly sporty, but very comfortable. Let's jump now to the McLaren drivers, both in Jaguars. And I don't see him drive an F-Pace Jag too often to the track. This is a hybrid and there are 3 different models available. My research indicates that these start at just above €70,000 here in Europe. And what version was Oscar driving? I'm not quite sure, but maybe you car aficionados can note it in the comments below. Lando Norris was also driving the same type of car, Jaguar F-Pace. Now we haven't seen this year Yeah, we haven't seen this year a McLaren being driven by a McLaren driver. And I'm disappointed. I love seeing him come in those fantastic cars. However, I was intrigued by Lawrence Stroll's comment that having this, not the safety, the medical car as a DBX 707 and also the safety car as a Vantage had led to a huge jump in sales, something like 70%, because people see that on the television and they go, let's look at that online. And he says the number of searches on race days is enormous. And I'd like to see McLaren drivers driving more McLarens to the track sometime soon. So please make that happen, Zach. Valtteri Bottas was in a Tonale, an Alfa Romeo Tonale. However, he didn't drive that on all days, if indeed he drove it on any, because he was coming in on a bicycle. As you know, he's a mad cyclist. And his girlfriend is an Australian Olympic cyclist, and her dad, Mike, was at the track. He, like me, heralds from South Australia. Next up, Zhou Guanyu, exactly the same car. Can't tell you much more about them. Can I tell you what Yuki Tsunoda was driving? Yes, and he was driving the exact same car as Nick De Vries. It was a Honda Civic Type R. We haven't seen them in a Type R this year, but nice to see those cars back. They're sporty, nippy, and quite popular, especially in Japan. And as I mentioned on my recent video, Nick didn't actually come in on all days in that car. On one day, he was ferried in on the back of a police scooter because the traffic had come to a standstill and he wasn't going to make the fan zone unless he got a ride without a helmet. Can I tell you what the Ferrari drivers drove? Well, yes, I can. SF90s. It was great to see them in a proper Ferrari sports car. And this is a mega car. They sell for just over 500, well, they start at just over 500,000 US dollars. And the stats say they do 0 to 100 in 2.5 seconds. But look at this review. These guys managed to get it to 100 kilometers an hour in 2 seconds, which is pretty mega. And normally on a car that does 0 to 100 in 2 seconds, it's pretty bare inside, but that's not the case with the SF90. It's got quite a bit of leather and plenty of creature comforts. This is a 2-seater car, and Carlos Sainz drove the exact same model, but just a different colour. I mentioned Aston Martin earlier on, so I'll tell you now what their drivers drove. They both drove DBXs, and they were both the 707 version. That is the much quicker version. These are just shy of $200,000 in the US, and they do 0 to 100 in 3.3 seconds. And I believe that leaves us with just 2 drivers, one being Kevin Magnussen, who drove this BMW, and the other is Nico Hulkenberg, who arrived in a Vauxhall Grandland Z, or Z as we'd say in my country, red in colour. I'd never heard of this car. Anyway, in Britain they sell for just over £25,000. But on one morning, Nico came in and I was photographing him walking towards me, and I was with Andrea from F1, a cameraman, and then suddenly Nico breaks into a run just to stick it up us. So I hot-footed it with him and managed to get a couple of shots that were luckily quite sharp. And this is Andrea on the left, having to keep up with the feisty German. And I remind you that you can pick up a signed Nico Hulkenberg print. Not only hand-signed, hand-numbered. Limited editions, 50 only. You get them at kimillman.com. When you click on the shop, you'll find a whole host of others available, along with merchandise, F1 photo books, and wall art. You'll find all of my digital images at prostarpics.com, and for my best images live from the track. And all during the week, you go to Instagram and you search Kim Illman. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. We're dropped off in the middle row. Oh, fucking hopeless that is.